Hey friend, this is Jennifer, and this is the Jennifer Allwood Show, the podcast for women who want to learn how to live an intentional life or build their creative business. I'll be giving you my very best business tips, bringing you interesting guests, giving you a daily dose of Jesus, and I'm committed to always keeping it real. Grab a cup of coffee and let's dive in. I'm so honored that you're here. Hey, my friend, did you know I'm hosting my first annual business conference? I think that by saying those words, that basically means I'm signing on for another one next year. I'm not sure. But anyway, we are hosting the Equipped Women's Conference here in Kansas City. This is a conference that's focused on arming God's women to do business in God's way. This is here in my hometown of Kansas City, Missouri, and we are so excited to have you. We're going to have some incredible speakers like top podcast host Jamie Ivey of the Happy Hour podcast. We have author and coach Dr. Brian Dixon, Jenny Taylor of Jenny Does Grace for all of you that love MLMs and network marketing, and then Chastity Stemmons, who owns Homemaker and High Heels and is also my personal stylist. You are going to have an incredible 2 days filled with tons of encouragement, connections, and tangible action items for your business. And so if you need a pick-me-up in your business, if you need a pick-me-up in your faith, then this is a great event for you. I want you to grab a girlfriend and I want you to get ready to be equipped. Go to jenniferallwood.com/conference and I will see you in Kansas City in May. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast this week. I'm super excited for really selfish reasons about my guest this week. I've got Chris Heuertz on the podcast with me, and I've brought Chris on to talk to us about the Enneagram. And I was thinking to myself, man, if you haven't heard of the Enneagram, like, where have you kind of been? But in talking to some family and friends in recent weeks, there's a lot of people that still don't know what the Enneagram is or how it could really be a blessing to both your life and to your business. And so I've brought in Chris because he is like the go-to person for Enneagram coaching. And I want to read you just the tiniest bit of his bio before I bring him here on the call with me. But Chris is the author of 3 books. He's a speaker. He's a nonprofit consultant and an anti-human trafficking activist, which is something that is very near and dear to my heart and to my church's heart as well. So I love that. But I love what his bio says, that he's the curator of unlikely friendships, an investigator for good, a witness to hope, and clergy for the common people. I just think that's so fun. So he's a frequent contributor to publications such as Christianity Today. And one of the first things that I want to talk to him about is how he was mentored by Mother Teresa for 3 years. So Chris, are you here on the line with me?
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate you including me on this.
Well, gosh, that is one heck of a biography. That is quite impressive. And so how does one even meet Mother Teresa? Not even to mention the fact that you were mentored by her. How does that even happen?
Well, I was young and ambitious, and I didn't really have a sense of, I guess, the scope of the demands on her life. But between my junior and senior year of university, I showed up in Calcutta at the house where she used to live, the convent there in the city. Knocked on the door and asked if there was work that I could help out with. And if you've ever visited Calcutta and you know the Missionaries of Charity, one of the real distinctives of how they serve is through hospitality. And so, of course, they make tons and tons of space for folks to join in.
Yes.
I ended up spending 2 months that summer in the house for the dying and attended to 50 folks who didn't survive that summer. And a few times, folks sort of urged me to just sort of check in with Mother and process what I was seeing and what I was doing. And she was super available, really generous with her time. Well, after I graduated university, I moved back to India. And every time I'd go up to Calcutta, which was pretty frequently, 2, 3, 4 times a year, I'd check in with her. I'd bring groups to meet with her. She'd share reflections and devotions with us. And again, I mean, just incredibly present, incredibly generous. Whenever she was in town and always available. And now that I look back on it, I realize how remarkable that was.
Yeah, what a gift. I mean, I'm guessing probably now that you're a little bit older that you, does that at all, like, do you feel like you need to almost be, passing that forward to people and kind of doing the same thing? Because I'm guessing when you look back on that time now that it just seems like how did that even happen? That's what I would be thinking anyway.
Yeah. And I do think this too. I feel like I want to really live into the responsibility of the gift of her presence in my life. The funny thing is every time I'd sit with her, she'd give me a little prayer card, or she'd write me a little note, or she'd send me away with a little medal of the Virgin Mary or a little crucifix. And, back then I was like, oh, my mom loves this old nun. So I basically gave almost all of that stuff to my mother, or lost most of it. And now when I go back to my mom and dad's house, I see these little notes like that she had written for me framed on my mom's wall. And of course I'm like, I sort of want that back now.
No doubt, right? No doubt. Well, I also saw in your biography, you are originally from Omaha, Nebraska. And I'd just like to give a shout out to Omaha. I am actually from the Sioux City, Iowa area, and went to college right outside of Omaha in Wayne, Nebraska. So we kind of have some similar stomping grounds there. So I brought you on the podcast today because I really want to talk about the Enneagram. And I know that you've been working with this for over 10 years with both individuals and communities, and helping people really understand what the Enneagram test is, what people's numbers mean, what their tendencies, temptations, and traits of their number actually mean. And I have to be real honest with you here. I had a friend last summer, Chris, and she was like, have you taken the Enneagram? And I'm like, what are you saying? Have you taken the Enneagram? And she's like, no, seriously, like, have you taken this test called the Enneagram? And I'm like, I haven't. So she sent me the link and she's like, just go ahead and take it. Well, a couple weeks went by and she came back around. She's like, did you take it yet? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, why do you want me to take it? And she said, well, she's fascinated with the Enneagram. And she said, I think I probably know what you are, but it would really help me just to understand like how you operate in business and our friendship and things if you were to take the quiz. So I thought, okay, let me sit down and take it quick. So I took it and got my little number. And if I understand correctly, there are 9 numbers that one can get. So I got mine. And then she was like, oh yeah, I knew that's exactly what you were. And then I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. So then I read the results of like what my Enneagram number meant. And then I was like, oh, I do not like that. I don't want to be that number, knowing full good and well, that doesn't define who I am or anything like that. But in my head, I'm like, that's not who I want to be. How do I change my number? And so then it just has gotten me involved in more conversations with different people about where they're at on the Enneagram. And the truth is, I don't know a lot about it other than my personal number. So I'd love if you could maybe talk to my listeners about what the Enneagram is, what it's used for, why you love it, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So frequently the Enneagram is, I think, mistakenly portrayed as this ancient personality system. And the truth is the Enneagram actually may be very, very ancient. Like there's rumored evidence of this 7,000 years ago in ancient Korea, or ancient Egypt, 4,000 years ago in prehistoric Korea, thousands of years ago with the early Greek mathematicians. It shows up over and over and over again, and it shows up in the mystical streams of the world's great religions, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But it really wasn't used to describe personality, let's say, or character structure until the mid-1970s.
Okay.
So this is kind of a new overlay to an old teaching, an old process teaching. Well, the overlay around personality has simply become that, the Enneagram of personality. And in 1971, 72, and 73, a Chilean Gestalt psychoanalyst by the name of Claudio Naranjo worked with some graduate students from Berkeley, and they developed really the sort of structure for 9 types of how we present in the world based on how we think, act, and feel. And so these 9 types have really now become sort of shorthand for personality, and people are getting more and more obsessed with this. I want to say though that these 9 types, it simply describes the masks that we wear. It simply describes the 9 ways that we sort of suffer our loss of contact with essence and suffer our loss of contact with our true selves. And so we're actually not our types. And so when you do come across your type, and if you feel like, oh, shoot, I don't want to be this, the good news is you don't have to. But the problem is most of us don't want to do the hard work, though, to live beyond type. And so we'd rather remain tethered to our personality, then remember our sort of purposed reason for being, our destined sort of gift that we were meant to bring forward into the world.
Yeah. There's a great quote from you that Emily, who helps me kind of gather some information prior to podcast, she got for me, and I'd love to read it. And I believe these are your words. It says, because of the Enneagram, I've learned how to recognize the predictable places I get stuck in relationships and how to show up in those relationships with receptivity and openness. And confronting my basic fear exposes the way I withhold myself from those that I love. And identifying the defense strategies my type uses to keep my childhood wounds unhealed allows me to open up in healing those wounds. And so I love that. And I love that a lot. Why? And then tell me why or how is the Enneagram different from, I am obsessed with like the DISC personality profile. I've also done like the Colby testing and the Myers-Briggs. So how does it differ from some of the rest of those?
Sure. So your Myers-Briggs sort of describes your temperament, right? And,
okay.
And this is something that may change, right? We've heard that the sort of data points to the more the older we get, the more we trend towards the introversion spectrum of temperament. So that's one way of measuring how do I interact in my environment per se, based on do I lead with my thoughts or my heart? Do I sense or intuit this more? And do I draw energy from people or being alone? The DISC test, this is really a popular test that's used on teams to sort of describe impact and how we relate, let's say, in a work environment with other impact styles. But the Enneagram, like I said, I think at its core, it shows you why your soul exists, why we need you to align with your virtue and your Enneagram type's holy idea. Now I'll say this: I think that you're born, and I've said this before. Like I've said, you're born your type, you'll die your type. If I really had to sort of trick out what I meant or mean by that, what I really fundamentally believe is you're born to bring a gift into the world, and you're imperfect in all of our imperfect early holding environments. There's a so-called childhood wound that disconnects us from that gift, and that's when type shows up, and type becomes the sort of skill set of coping addictions that we wrap around that wound so that we don't have to tell ourselves the truth about who we really are. And that's the bummer. Most of us don't know that we don't know who we are. And so we build out scaffolding around the projection of our own ego mythology, and we prefer to sort of be our personalities. We prefer to be our types. Mm-hmm. And this is the good news here. Like I said, you don't have to be your type. You can return to your essence. It just takes probably a lifetime of excavating that essence.
Yeah, I love that you just used the word scaffolding when you were talking, because a lot of the people who listen to my podcast, Chris, are creative people. They are makers, DIYers, painters, artists. So a lot of them are on ladders and on scaffolding. So they will totally get that. So if they wanted to pause real quick before we continue talking and they wanted to go take the Enneagram test so they could see what their number is, where do you suggest people go?
I generally recommend that people go to the Enneagram Institute's website and take the RETI test. And I think it might cost $10 or $12, but okay. I think of all the tests out there, it's probably the one that gives you the clearest resulting on what you're trying to sort of unearth when you approach the Enneagram.
Okay.
Now, if you don't want to take a test, or if the tests don't work for you, then of course you can simply just read the thick descriptions of the 9 types from a trusted source, a trusted school, or a trusted teacher, and usually we're pretty. If you can be honest and compassionate with yourself when you read the thick descriptions, it becomes pretty clear and pretty evident. If that's not helping, I really do think maybe the best way to do this to find a one conversation partner or somebody who's been working with the Enneagram on themselves for a while, because this is the thing. Once you do come across the Enneagram, once you do find your type, man, it's on. Everything changes. And people do get super excited about this.
It was, even though I didn't like my number, and I want to talk about the numbers next, but even though I didn't like my number, it was still like, I think, Chris, I think we all kind of have like this deep desire to understand ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the first time I took the DISC profile, for instance, I think that was like the first test I ever took that was personality based. And I just remember going, oh, that explains a lot, knowing that I was a high S on the DISC personality. And then when my husband took it and he's a high I had the same like aha moment, like, oh, that's why we drive each other nuts. Or, that's why he behaves like he does. And so I agree with you, like really eye-opening. And I know I took the free version of the test somewhere. I think it was at the enneagraminstitute.com, somewhere in there. But could we talk just really quickly through the 9 different numbers real quick? Do you have like, kind of go-to examples for some of these, like people we would know for each of these numbers, or is that putting a whole lot of pressure on you?
Well, I generally don't try to type people that I don't know.
Sure. No. Okay.
People should bring their own types forward.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because it does sort of expose the contours of our ego, which can be really humiliating for people.
Okay.
And I think until you're ready for this, it can be devastating to first come across type. But if when we do introduce the types, and if we start at type 1, right?
Sure.
This is, in the old days, Father Richard Rohr, one of my teachers and mentors, sort of described type 1 as the need to be perfect, right? Type 1 has been given these various names over the years by the different schools, and the ones that have sort of stuck are the reformer or the perfectionist, right?
Yeah.
Ones are incredibly principled people who have a really idealized notion of goodness, and they sort of suffer this fear that they are somehow inherently corrupt and that they'll never be able to be as good as they want to or as they think they should be. And so they suffer that through really aiming a lot of resentment towards themselves for simply being human, for simply having flaws, without realizing that it's in fact their flaws that make them beautiful. And that's what we appreciate the most about them.
Yeah. And I've heard that. I have a friend who is a 1. And then the number 2 is the helper. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this is the folks who sort of have this chronic need to be needed, incredibly heart forward, incredibly nurturing, compassionate. Their emotional intelligence is just off the charts, and they can actually read the emotions and feelings of someone else almost better than they can read their own. This person really sort of suffers this fear that they're not loved for who they are, but what they give. And so they continue to sort of double down on self-abnegation and pouring themselves out as a way of hopefully earning the connection and the affection that they desire. It's just this sort of comically tragic accident of missing the point, because 2s really are a source of nurturing love and acceptance. And really, if there's a 2 in your life, you know that, because there's nobody who will take better care of you than somebody who's a type 2.
Tell me about number 3.
Yeah, so 3 is the need to succeed. Now, I actually get super bummed out when I come across that little handle, the need to succeed, because the 3 isn't the most driven or the most ambitious of the 9 types. It's simply that the 3 may have the sort of most emptied or hollowed out heart center. And so as little kids, to try to fill that heart, they do this by chasing down recognition, affirmation, validation, and rewards. And they would actually allow this recognition and validation to sort of be a proxy or a substitute for love. And so as children, they began to realize that it was in their successes that they were sort of affirmed, and then that it sort of tried to allay or waylay this fear that they somehow don't have inherent or intrinsic value. And so to become more valuable so that they could actually become more lovable, they did kick in that ambition, that drive, that need to succeed. Sure. So they're sometimes called the performer or the achiever. They're often really subtle and low key, but really image conscious as another way of trying to make themselves more valuable so that they can be more lovable. They find themselves sort of accidentally in leadership roles. People look up to them. They have just a real clarity of vision. And man, they're some of the hardest working people out there. Threes are real go-getters, quietly competitive, and really competitive with themselves. And so, for me, like the three is one of the maybe most obvious of the types in terms of the suffering, this loss of love, and how we go about it in 9 different ways. The bummer for the threes is that they don't want to be outed. They don't want people to sort of know their secret sauce and what's behind the curtain. So they play roles, and they end up really believing a lot of the roles that they play.
Yeah, I am a 3 when I took the test. And, the test that I took when I got the results, and it said they're, the achiever, the performer. I'm like, no. That sounds like I'm a fake. I don't want to be a fake. And so I really struggled with that. And I know I was talking to my friend Christy. She's like, I knew you were a 3. And I said, well, I don't want to be a 3. And she said, most 3s don't want to be a 3. And I don't know where she's, getting that information. But when I hear you sit and talk about it, that describes me really pretty well.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Like once you do come across your type, it does really give you sort of the framework and the structure for these components of self that maybe we've always known, but we didn't have language for.
Sure.
And this is, one of the gifts of the teaching here. It lets you sort of see what it is that you're contending with, so that you know what it is that you need to do or could do.
Excellent. I'm not sure I understand number 4. It's the individualist, and I don't really know what that means.
Sure. So type 4 is said to have this need to be unique, right? And so these are people who are constantly in search of their identity, because their basic fear is that they're somehow disconnected from their origin, that they somehow don't know who they are. Now, these are maybe the most sensitive and emotionally attuned of all the Enneagram types, and this sensitivity combined with this fear that they've lost their ground of being as it relates to the core of their identity can really create some deep sadness here.
Yes, some friction.
Doesn't necessarily mean that they're sad people. It just means that they're honest about the suffering of trying to find themselves. And so 4s see beauty in everything. And, they get cliched out as very artistic, and that may not actually be the case. It's simply that if they can't see themselves, if they're afraid that they don't know themselves, and what they do is they try to see what's beautiful and good in everyone else outside of themselves. And then they hope that favor, in a sense, would be returned. And so there's a lot of fantasizing. There's a lot of longing. There's a lot of sort of yearning that goes on in the heart of the 4. But they're fabulous. I mean, they do have this keen eye to see what's significant in everything and everyone outside of themselves. And this is their work is to look inward and to see their own beauty.
And I'm trying to, in my head, I'm going through my Rolodex of people I know, and I can't think of anybody that I think would be that. And yet I'm so intrigued. Tell me about the 5.
So 5 is sometimes called the investigator or the observer or the theorist. This is the need to understand. These are the most cerebrally evacuated of the types. The 4 and the 5 sit at the bottom of the Enneagram circle. And in a sense, they're sort of shouldering the weight of this whole thing for us. And so these are really among the most withdrawn of the types.
Okay.
The 4 withdrawn into their hearts, the 5 withdrawn into its head.
Okay.
The 5 is an incredible analyzer of information. Just really takes a question and turns it over every possible way to get to the bottom of it. And so this is why sometimes 5s might look a little pokey. Is they're just gathering all the information, and they need every piece of any puzzle that possibly could contain any clue to sort of the essence of all things. The 5s are also really misunderstood, because in some of the languaging around them, it's sort of said that their emotional passion is avarice or greed. And it's not that they're greedy. It's just that they've really calculated their energy, and they know where and how to spend it. And that's really in their mind, in the realm of ideas, abstractions, concepts, theories. So
they sound smart, Chris. They sound smart.
Well, they generally tend to be really smart, but more accurately, they're really, really, really in their heads.
Gotcha. Deep.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to say it? Deep. All right. And number 6 is the loyalist.
Yeah, so this is the need to be secure, and these are the great threat forecasters of human character structure. They're worst case scenarios, or thinkers. They're contingency planners. They're always looking at what could go wrong, and
yes,
they double down on that. But you see, what they're really doing here is just trying to take care of everybody, and especially the people that they love, their significant partner, people in their families, or communities, or on their teams. And so when it looks like they may be sort of losing their center and getting a little anxious, we have to always remember, like, what's behind that is this attempt to care for folks. And then caring for us, they will sort of go to the most ridiculous, extreme scenarios to just sort of think them through, to problem solve and find a way out.
Is the number 6, Chris, the Enneagram number that sometimes it's suggested that they don't watch a lot of news because news tends to really upset them at a different level than maybe it does other numbers? Or am I making that up in my head?
I think you probably have 9 different reactions to the news. And I think in 9 different ways we can fixate around anything, right? And so,
sure.
So again, see, this is where I might come at this a little differently than a lot of folks that you may hear out there in the netherworld of podcasting. But all the things that look like quirks and foibles and these endearing little personality traits have motivations behind them. And I think that's what the Enneagram shows. It's less like, hey, if you're a 1, you should be in quality control. And hey, if you're a 2, you should be in personality. And hey, if you're a 3, you should be in management. No, like that's missing the point entirely, actually. Like the point is in 9 different ways we approach the same scenarios, the same opportunities, the same challenges, but in 9 different ways we bring it 1/9 of sort of the piece of the puzzle to find the completion or the right way through. And that's why knowing yourself is important, but that's also why this is an important teaching for communities and people in communities.
I love it so much. 7s are the enthusiasts.
Yeah, so this is the need to avoid pain, and this is the type that actually presents as heart forward, but in fact is much like the 3, completely disconnected from its own heart. And this is a coping strategy because the 7 is curious and playful and imaginative, and they're always sort of up and on the go. And what's behind that is simply this fear that if they stop and if they actually sort of find themselves and root themselves in the present, they're going to have to face the pain that they've hidden from themselves in the back of their heart. And so rather than facing that, because of the fear that may overwhelm them, they run from it. And so we love to be around 7s because they're perpetually on vacation from their own pain, and they take us on vacation from ours. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's kind of enabling.
Who doesn't want a vacation, Chris?
Right.
And then 8 is the challenger. And that is what I'm not familiar with either.
So this is the need to be against. This is the type that sort of hates bullies, but it's the biggest bully. This is,
they're confrontational, right?
Yes, very confrontational. Okay. They're contrarians. They push back on everything, and what they're simply doing is testing everyone. And so they may be foul-mouthed and vulgar and inappropriate to just sort of size you up. Like if their foul language pushes you away, fabulous. That was efficient, because something else later on will be more offensive, and they want to get that betrayal out of the way sooner than later. The 9 is like all of us in 9 different ways, projecting what we don't want to contend with inside ourselves, outside themselves. And so what the 9 does to sort of heal the world is a distraction from sort of facing their own inner fragmentation. The 9 minimizes what's important to them, because the 9 wants to make everybody else outside themselves more important. The 9 has a real ability to sort of bring the energy of a room down, to sort of mellow out a conversation, to sort of help people find their center and to really root themselves in peace. And so this is one of the gifts that 9s bring is that kind of clarity to be in the present. For the 9, it's just remembering that they're important and what's important to them needs to be important to the people in their lives. And for 9s, they feel bad sometimes by making that known. But, there's 9 different ways that we have to sort of show up and wake up and grow up and own ourselves. And 9s play a unique role in that. They sit at the top of the circle. They are the source of love. And when they align with that love, their virtue is right action. And there's nothing more beautiful or healing than love and action. And that's what the 9s offer us.
So I love that. So tell me so for somebody that's listening right now, Chris, and they're like, okay, I've taken the test. I've kind of got my number. I'm, just starting to kind of play with these ideas and mess around with it. Like, how does the Enneagram come into play? Or how do you use this in your relationships? Like, what can we gain from it?
The thing is when Claudio Naranjo was building out these personality types back in the early 1970s, he actually had all of his students sign a confidentiality agreement, a sort of contract of reserve, basically saying that they would not tell anybody else about the Enneagram until they had done their own work. And actually, I think there's some wisdom in that. I do think, like I said earlier, it's like as soon as you come across this, man, you just want to tell everybody about it. You want to type everybody. You want to share this sort of new knowledge. But I think the real hard work for most of us is to work on ourselves.
That's so good. So tell me, do you hold seminars on this? Do you do coaching on this? Where can somebody go to learn more about you, to learn more about, your work with the Enneagram? Tell us all about that.
Sure. So I do quite a bit of one-on-one work, and that keeps me super duper busy. And so if you go to our website, gravitycenter.com, you can schedule meetings, one-on-one meetings, either in person, over the phone, or on Skype, with me, as well as a few other Enneagram specialists that we work with, that offer, I think, really great starting points to using this for spiritual growth, for body work, for relationships, wherever you need to take this. And so if you go to sacredenneagram.org, we always keep an updated list of where those workshops will be. And we're constantly seeing, every single day we're seeing registrations coming in for the various retreats and workshops that we do.
That's fabulous. Thank you. And Chris, where do you want somebody to find you on social? What's your favorite playground? Is it Facebook, Instagram?
I think Twitter and Instagram are usually where I camp out.
Okay.
Simply Chris Heuertz at both of those.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. This was eye-opening, and it's fascinating to me, really. And like I said earlier, I just think people really like knowing more about themselves and kind of what makes them tick and, why we behave in certain ways. So I appreciate you shedding light on all of those numbers and taking time just to chat with us today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey friend, thank you so much for listening to the podcast again this week. I'm so honored that you're here and that you just listen week in and week out and that you share the Jennifer Allwood Show with your friends and family. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey, don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, or if you're an Android user, go download the Stitcher app and you can subscribe there so that you know every single week when a new episode releases. Also, if you have any time to leave us a review, these reviews are super important in getting guests for the show and sponsors for the show. And so we'd appreciate it if you have just a second to leave us a review. That would be amazing. Thank you guys again for being here. And until next week, stay creative.